Hello and welcome to Forefront's Frequently Asked Questions. This one is, should I put a zero in or leave the spreadsheet box blank? So this is if a student didn't answer a question, and like most of these videos, the answer will be, it depends. So in an ideal world, you would kind of connect with the student just because whether or not you're using Forefront, that blank question doesn't give us a lot of data. Did they skip it on accident? Did they not realize it was a question, or do they have no idea how to start it? So ideal world, you would ask them just if they can try something or if they didn't see it, and their answer to that will kind of give you an indication of where their performance level is. But let's be in the real world, and maybe that student is gone the day you're grading, or you didn't notice they skipped the question until too late. So there's two options here. So we're looking at this spreadsheet for a pre-assessment, and let's say on number 2, Sonoma and Jacob left the question blank. So there's two options, right? You can either give a 0 or leave the box blank. Giving a 0 does count against the student. But when we say count against, that kind of sounds harsh, even though it's just clear what I mean when I say it. But when that piece of evidence is in there, we can understand that the student was not proficient on the question. The way that Forefront calculates proficiency most heavily weights recent evidence. So even if you give them a 0 on the pre-assessment, because of the way we weight things, if they do well on the checkpoints, do well on the post-assessment, it doesn't really count against them anymore because that's old data. But when you're kind of looking at the student, thinking about their progress, it can be helpful to have that data point of, oh, this time when they took the assessment, there was no attempt or no work or whatever that might be. The alternative to that is leaving the question blank, like we did with Jacob. So that will not show up as data. It won't kind of count against the student. But the downside is if this is important that he's skipping these questions and isn't able to do them, that's not going to be reflected in his history. So sometimes it's just helpful to have more data and to understand kind of where the student's coming from. The last thing to kind of think about, and let me collapse this sidebar so we can see it, is if you don't fill out all of the squares of the spreadsheet, we will not calculate an overall. Because if we did, it would be artificially low, and that blank would count against the student. So if you're a school that is doing data team meetings with certain reports, you may want to have an overall. I'll show you what I mean here and kind of the trade-offs. So if we look at the single assessment report, you'll see that we have data for Jacob when we're looking at the question because he's filled out the question. When we look at the standards, we can still see him on those ones where the question was completed. But then in the performance, where we're looking at the overall, we only have data for Sonoma because she's the only one with a calculated overall. So if you're looking at standards, not having the calculated overall isn't as big of a deal. But if you're looking at a series report, if you're looking at the flexible assessment report, those do look at overall assessment performance, and these kids will just not show up. Last place I'll kind of show these trade-offs here is in the student proficiency wheel. So if we look at Sonoma, we'll kind of have, and now I don't remember which question I counted for her. I think it was MBT. So yeah, here we go. So, and you can kind of see the trade-off is if she just accidentally skipped that question because she was proficient on everything else, we still kind of have a flag here. So she's coming in at basic. So if you left that blank, it would look better. But if she truly missed that or truly didn't understand how to do that, we don't want it to show up as proficient. With Jacob here, you're going to see there's no 0 in there kind of counting against him just because we didn't fill out that data. The last consideration, so that's kind of all the general stuff, but the last consideration is if you're a district that is modifying assessments, so let's say you're only giving the first half of a unit pre-assessment or something like that, and you have basic or premium, you can modify assessments. So instead of having to leave some blank for everyone, if the whole school is just doing the first page, you could create a clone and modify that. So you have the best of both worlds, which is teachers fill out the blanks, but only for the questions they want to give, and there's a computed overall. So that's kind of the final consideration, but that's more at a higher level versus just a teacher decision. So those are some thoughts about whether or not to put a zero or leave it blank, and kind of ultimately it's what makes sense to the teacher in the context of their classroom.